Yeah. Yeah, and something that I want to, something that's coming, I'd say up in the Q&A that's pretty understandable is kind of being intimidated by the student who we showed, Jerry. Um, people are like, oh my gosh, he took 11 AP classes and he has all these, fives on the AP exam and, he's maxing out his curriculum in 10th grade. I think it's important to know that, if you are targeting these highly selective schools, there are students that are out there who are doing things like that. This student was particularly rated very, very highly on Stanford's scale. So that's something that you need to be aware of, is that he was 80% of the students are academically admissible in some way, shape, or form, depending on what the college is typically looking for. But this is a student who's kind of above and beyond in like the top, 1% of their applicant pool in terms of academic performance, right? So that's not to say that that's the expectation for every student who's tuning into this webinar, or every family who's tuning into this webinar. This happens to be a student who is exceptionally scoring, and that's why he got that exceptional, very, very high score for that particular category that they offer. Most students are somewhere in the middle. So for me at Pomona, most of the students, when they were applying, were somewhere on the academic and personal scale. We had it out of 5. And most students were getting a 3 personal. That's like the vast majority of the students who are applying, probably about like 65%, 70% are a 3 personal. You have strong personal characteristics. Very, very few 5s academically, and then more 4s, because again, there's more objective criteria compared to the personal side that colleges are factoring these cases into. But just really, really remember the importance of context here, and the importance of kind of what is available in your own local environment, because that does, I think, take off that pressure to feel like you need to be doing so much more. At this stage, if you're a junior and you're applying and you're putting your application together, I would say the best use of your time are some of the things that Susan and I shared here. It's easy to get caught up in looking at someone like Jerry's file and seeing the things like the test score or the number of APs and thinking I'm behind in some way. But what's, I think, really important to know, and the big takeaway from his application, are some of the things that the admissions officer is noting. That section about his quantifiable things was one paragraph among a whole write-up of lots of different reasons as to why the student was being admitted. And yes, it was because of that academic profile, and because the student has that fit for the university, that fit for the major that is not as common for them. That intellectual vitality that they really look for in students. Repeatedly, it comes over and over again in the writing that is why the student was elevated in their process from, where many students are, which is in that kind of waitlist kind of middle territory, to that eventual acceptance letter. Another thing that I noticed in the Q&A that's coming up a lot is questions around standardized testing. So obviously right now in the current landscape, it is a little hard to know kind of how to approach testing and testing well, because there are some parts of the country where test centers are not available. There's other parts of the country where access to standardized testing prep in general is difficult, right? So it's something that there are a small handful of highly rejected colleges that have announced a return to testing. And for some of you, if these are colleges on your list, you have to wrestle whether or not test prep and engagement with preparing as best you can for standardized tests is something that you want to do. You absolutely can have a college list that has completely full test optional colleges. In fact, I'm working with students right now who are high achieving students. They've done well in high school. They have a lot to contribute to various colleges and universities, and standardized testing is not the way that they want to be spending their time or their energy. And they're not doing that. So that's something that I'd say, if you're wondering whether or not to submit your scores, it's good to be aware of like those middle 50% that colleges put out there on their common data set or on their press release or things like that, or information that each college usually updates every year. They show you the range of scores that are currently being admitted. And what you'll see from the past couple of years, ever since most colleges went test optional, is that those scores ranges are now a little inflated toward the higher end, because understandably, students who previously would have been completely admissible when it comes to standardized testing were not sorry, I'm like losing thought because I see the Q&A going along. That students who they chose not to submit tests because they were worried about not being on the top end of the range. So now there's these colleges that have all these high ranges, and it's understandable for students to be concerned about their scores not being high enough. But We did studies at Pomona, for example, that if you had above, I believe it was a 27 on the ACT, and anything above 600s on each section of the SAT, you were on, like, statistically, there was not a higher prevalence of you not graduating on time, failing out of your classes, not doing well. You didn't necessarily have the top GPA at the college, but in terms of academic viability, students who had scores of those ranges were viable candidates to be admitted. And I wish more colleges actually published that data, because I think a really big concern for people right now is, should I submit my scores or not? And I think the two questions to ask yourself are, objectively, where am I falling in the ranges that these colleges have most recently produced? And then the other question to ask yourself is my achievement when it comes to standardized testing anomalous for the community that I'm coming from? Because even if your scores are below the median, and I know people in admissions say this, and sometimes it can feel risky because I don't know, I think people worry about it. The admissions officers want to make a case for you. Like, right. They are not actually wanting to ding you for standardized testing. They could easily filter kids out with test scores if they wanted to do that. But most admissions officers actually really, really want to advocate for students, and they don't care as much about the testing. There's usually more of a business component around it. And that's actually, there's a lot of business reasons as to why some schools have brought back their testing, political reasons. So all that to say, if you're concerned about standardized testing, two questions to ask yourself: how are you in comparison to the ranges that are posted? And then the other question to ask yourself is my score high? If you look at the school profile for the high school that you're applying to, is your score much higher than the mean or the median scores that students from your high school are producing? If so, it's an additive component to your application, because people in admissions read in context. They read based on, okay, this student's coming from this area that maybe has less access to resources. Maybe it's not as much of a strong college-going culture, and yet their standardized testing is far above what most students are producing from the school. That would be a reason and a rationale to send in your score. So I would say, if these schools are on your list and you're worried about testing, add them. You have nothing to lose by sending in an application. You just have to prepare yourself for the very high likelihood that you don't get in, because most students don't get in. But don't have standardized testing be the thing that discounts you from putting your hat in the ring.
Very good explanation, if I do say so myself. Couple questions, Tom, about choice of major, and we hit on that pretty hard, because I happen to think it's becoming more and more influential, even within the liberal arts and sciences. When a student applies to a university that has a division of liberal arts, a division of business, a division of engineering, maybe a division of nursing, education, journalism, and communications, the specialty programs that are pre-professional in nature are usually the most selective, because they tend to be the most faculty and resource intensive programs. And they are therefore more competitive. So some colleges in their admissions, the admissions sections on the websites will say, if you're aiming at highly selective, impacted, constrained, professional programs, they'll use different language for it. Be sure to have a second choice. Not all universities will evaluate you for that second choice, but some will. And that's a very good question for you as a parent/student to ask the admission counselor for your territory, to say how much of an influence in this process will be the specific choice of major. The more specific you are about a major, biomedical engineering, neuroscience, even some of the liberal arts fields like psychology and economics, which are really, really popular and overrepresented in a lot of colleges' applicant pools. Colleges will look for evidence of your understanding what that field of study entails, both through coursework that you've chosen to take and through engagement in activities that would deepen your understanding of whatever it is. So just bear in mind, and you have to respect the competition in this dimension, that there are a lot of kids out there doing a lot of, taking a lot of really cool courses and doing a lot of extracurricular activities that are educating them so that when they indicate a first or second choice major, they really know what they're talking about. And it comes through those supplementary pieces of writing in the Common App for each college, where a student is basically asked to defend their choice of academic field of study. Now, undecided is a totally legitimate aspiration. Undecided does not mean that you don't have any interests. It actually means that you have really genuine interest in a number of different fields of study and can defend that. So again, don't say, oh, gee, if I don't put, finance or pre-med or, psychology, I'm out of luck. Be loud and proud about being undecided and be smart about it too. It's a great choice. Tom, you're muted.
Thank you.
Come back.
Thank you. Trying to see if there's any other common questions. I mean, some of the questions that earlier on are about demonstrated interest. And I would say, in addition to the blog that Diana communicated, what I want to really like underscore is that even for the schools where demonstrated interest is not a factor in the process, it's still, I'd say, a worthwhile. Sometimes this is the stage in the process. If you're a junior student and family, this can start to be the phase in the process where you you start to question like your past, that part of the analyzing past performance and predicting future potential. The main kind of like maybe question that admissions officer sits down when they read a file and is thinking about in the back of their head. It can start to be tempting to want to question the decisions that you made when it comes to the past. And just know that, it's something that the past is what it was. And the real kind of job right now is to take advantage of the opportunities available to you in the application to share as much of the core values that you want to bring to a college campus, not to ding yourself or to get on your case about, oh, I didn't take that additional AP class that I should have taken junior year, right? I think another action step to take right now is to get a better sense of what high achievement looks like for your school community. So whether you have a program like Naviance or SCORE or Maya Learning or some type of data tracking system that usually the college counseling office or guidance office of your high school will provide to students and families, that will give you a sense for the hot, heavy AP or honors or IB load that that at your high school, depending on what's available there, it will give you a sense for kind of what these more highly selective schools are looking for when it comes to academic background. So that's something I think to just be aware of in terms of actionable steps you can take. And at this stage, right, putting together a great application and communicating those values, those skills, the areas where you've made initiative, where you've shown impact. Those are going to be the things that move the needle for you more at this stage, as opposed to beating yourself up for maybe some past decisions that were probably really justified at the time. And knowing that there's places like the additional information section in the college application to explain some of those things, and strategically utilizing that blank space of 600 words or so that's right after the personal statement, the personal essay in the Common App. That's where you have a chance to kind of maybe explain some of those things that may have not been as sunshine and rainbows about your process. Yeah. Another question that came up a couple times, just specifically related to Stanford, was what does school support mean on the rubrics? So just so you know, school support is usually the term that every college uses different terminology, which makes it, that's why there's all these acronyms, and it doesn't always make sense when us as quick plebeian readers who do not work for that particular college are looking at these things really quickly and being like, what do all these acronyms mean? School support is a term that refers to the college counselor recommendation and the teacher recommendations that a student may be submitting to the colleges they're applying to. So most selective colleges typically tend to have some type of recommendation requirement, unless a high school, doesn't submit recommendations, which is sometimes the case. Again, as with everything in the process, just like standardized testing, admissions officers use the material that they have access to make a case for students. So not having something doesn't necessarily mean that you are dinged or you get a low rating for if you come from a high school that doesn't, for example, have really robust, glowing recommendations. That's most high schools in the US, because the counselor to student ratio is very high. And people in admissions know that. They read them with that same lens and understanding that, okay, the student's coming from a high school with thousands of kids. The counselor has 500 students on their caseload, understandably, there's not this much level of detail of interpersonal qualities that you may get from a smaller high school environment. It means that the person in admissions is going to be going to other places to make a case for the student around those personal qualities, the things that would be included in a recommendation. Those are things that, first and foremost, the person in admissions looked at the student's own words and essays. And that's really something that can make a difference too. Trying to see if there's anything else that's like lingering that's kind of more macro level.
These are like the best questions I've ever gotten.
I know, it's so good.
I know. I just really
stop.
appreciate it. And I love feeling like we're in conversation about them as we go through, but I really do apologize that I know there are many that we missed, and I hope we got to them in some way.
Yeah. I think probably for the sake of like, I guess, equity for people's questions, I think we tried to cover the ones that were the most general. There's a couple questions about extracurriculars, and just my real quick tip there is that, and you may have heard this before, but it really is about quality and not quantity. Statistically, most students on the Common Application put 5 to 7 extracurricular activities. I mean, in fact, actually, I wrote a very, very comprehensive, thanks to collaborations with Susan, other people on the College Essay Guide college counseling team. Let's see. I wrote a very comprehensive extracurricular guide that actually goes into all the detail around the questions of extracurricular guide. Like, how many should you be doing? How do people read them? How do people evaluate them? What are the questions that they're asking? And in general, I'd say most students who apply to even the most selective colleges really only have time for 3, maybe 4, what I call core activities that are the majority of the way that they're spending their time. So maybe they're an athlete, they play 2 sports, and then maybe they're involved also in drama club and a service program. 4 activities, right? That they are able to really sink their teeth into and actually demonstrate initiative, show impact. They might have more though on their total list of things though, because maybe they go to a French club once every 2 weeks and they eat escargot and watch Emily in Paris, right? Like, there's things that you can be involved in when it comes to social connection and, interests that you have that aren't necessarily these big springboards for some of the qualities that people in admissions are looking for. And of course, it shows variety, it shows your interests. But in terms of those deep activities that really kind of warrant a lot of conversation, MIT actually only has 4 spaces for activities on their application, and it's very intentional. They have language on their website that says, from our experience, most students don't really have more than these that are like real substantive meaty activities that are the majority of the way that they're spending their time. So I'd say that should be, an aim for you, is to have maybe 3 to 4 things that you've done in high school that have been substantive. But then again, there are students who have to work to provide for their families or have significant, caretaking responsibilities, driving younger siblings to practices in school and maybe even cooking meals. So the environment that every student's coming from is different. And so number of things and kind of blanket advice on these webinars is always like, I feel like we showed a lot of scores and rubrics, and there's obviously a lot of understandable comparison to maybe some of the test subjects or sample essays that we showed in this webinar. It's hard for all 500 attendees to kind of see themselves in all those people, and it's understandable to want to maybe compare yourself to certain loads, but just know that the person in admissions is not doing that. They're comparing you to people. They are comparing you to people in your local relative environment. That is something that I think it's good to be aware of. And the more awareness you have of that, the more you can approach this process with a sense of what you can control. Susan, what do you think? Do you think that might be the more optimistic tone to end on?
I think that's terrific. I think that's terrific. I mean, this is a very human process that has a tremendous overlay of business. The colleges view admissions as an extremely important part of managing their institutions financially and in terms of resource. They're huge businesses. That does not mean that it is not an extremely human business. And the hard work that all of our students put into their applications and to, upfront picking colleges that are a good fit. And, get the best advice you can from school counselors, read what you can, educate yourself. And know that, you know, the fact that you're here tonight and involved in this shows that you're all eager to get information that's balanced and empowering. And we really appreciate you being with us.
I appreciate you being here despite the inclement weather in Pennsylvania that hopefully it didn't impact your connectivity. So that's good.
It didn't, but let me just tell you, the storm that has just rolled by, and any of you that are in the New York to DC corridor on the East Coast, this is a crazy storm system. It was right out of the Wizard of Oz. But I'm in a safe place where there were no power issues. So very grateful for that. Glad I took a precaution.
Good, good. Well, and thank you all for tuning in. And for those, the 253 who are still here, thank you for spending an extra half hour with us. Really appreciate it. There's so much information on these topics. And actually, I teach a course that's, I don't know if we'll be offering it again in the fall, but it's about applying to highly selective schools. And I have 3 full days to go into a lot more of these points in more detail. It's available on demand on the College SCI website if it's of interest. And there's some videos on YouTube too about it. But yeah, just parting words, just want to really say that you are, by even attending webinars like this and equipping yourself for this information, I think you're giving yourself more food for thought about how to put your best application together, and parents and guardians, how to help support your child with putting their best application together. So know that us at College SCI, we are here for that, whether it's through our courses, through one-on-one essay and application support, through college counseling, which both Susan and I do. So be in touch with our team, and we'd love to support any way we can. So thank you so much. And we hope you have a great rest of your evening and day.
Thank you, friends, for being with us.